That night, I stood before the glass wall of my penthouse, the city glittering below, reading Dad's text. Grant's graduation is that weekend. We can't make it. You understand. I typed no problem and put the phone down, feeling my heart close like an elevator door. They didn't know the show they were skipping was in my own home. They didn't know CNN was about to tell my story, and the calls would start. From the very family who saw me as the spare seat. My name is Rowan Ellery. The studio is quiet, but it is never silent. High in the Aurora Tower, the sound is different. It is not the absence of noise, but a filtration of it. The city exists 80 floors below, a complex, shimmering circuit board of light and intent, but the only sound that reaches me here is the sophisticated hum of recycled air and the faint, ghostly whisper of wind moving against acres of reinforced glass. My studio, my home, is a glass box suspended in the twilight. Tonight, the sky is a deep, bruised purple, and the first wave of evening lights is beginning to pulse, a mirror of the stars we have forgotten how to see. I was standing at the edge of the world, or at least, the edge of my world, tracing the grid of the streets with my eyes. When the phone vibrated, it did not ring. I do not allow rings. A vibration. On the polished concrete floor where I had left it is a ripple, an intrusion. The screen lit up the floor. Dad. I walked over, my bare feet cold on the concrete, and picked it up. I answered. Rowan, his voice was exactly as I remembered it from 2 months ago, and 2 months before that, it is the voice of a man reading a chart. A voice that believes in blood pressure and cholesterol levels, in things that can be measured and recorded in ink. Hi, Dad. Your mother has your invitation here. The one with the wax? A small huff. He has no patience for aesthetics. It is the same weekend as Grant's graduation from his residency program. I waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the building. He has worked very hard for this, Rowan, he continued, as if I were a new patient requiring context. We will be in Boston for the ceremony. We cannot be in 2 places at once. I know, I said. My own voice sounded distant, filtered through the same glass as the city. So we will not be attending your show. He said the word show, as if it were a foreign diagnosis, something vaguely unpleasant he was required to pronounce. I heard a fumbling on the line, the sound of the phone being passed. Rowan, dear? My mother's voice, forever light, forever apologizing for taking up space. It is just terrible timing, is it not? You know how important this is for Grant. Do not make a fuss about it. Do not make a fuss. The motto of my childhood, the guiding principle of the Ellery household, a place where emotions were symptoms to be managed, not experiences to be shared. I am not making a fuss, Mom. Good. We would not want you to be disappointed. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I looked out at the city, a sea of light so vast it seemed to go on forever. Disappointment was a luxury I had packed away years ago, along with my high school yearbooks and the belief that trying hard was enough. No problem, I said. The words came out clean, sterile. I understand. Tell Grant congratulations. I ended the call. I did not hang up abruptly. I pressed the red icon on the screen with a steady thumb. Then, I placed the phone back on the polished floor. I did not drop it. I did not throw it. I placed it, intentionally, as if I were setting down a very heavy stone that I had been forced to carry. The small black rectangle looked impossibly small in the vastness of the room. A single, dark, silent object. They do not know where I live. They know, in an abstract sense, that I am in the city and doing well with my art hobby. They have never asked for the address. They have never seen the Aurora Tower, let alone the penthouse. They have no concept that the show they are declining is not in some drafty rented gallery in a bad neighborhood. It is here. The show is here. This entire space, this $11.8 million volume of air and light, is the gallery. I bought it not to live in, but to exhibit in. For the past 6 months, This apartment has been a construction site, not for a home, but for an installation. The Italian marble kitchen was torn out to make way for a projection wall. The master bedroom, with its panoramic views of the river, is the climate-controlled storage for the permanent collection. The main living area, this two-story expanse of glass and concrete where I now stand, is the main gallery, my first solo exhibit, the quiet table. And they will not be attending. My gaze drifted from the phone to the center of the room. There, under a single, perfectly focused spotlight, hung the centerpiece, the eye of the storm, the painting that had started it all, the spare seat. It is not a large painting, as paintings go in the contemporary world. It is intimate, a simple, wooden dining chair, painted in obsessive detail, pushed just slightly away from a table that you can only see the edge of, the grain of the wood, the scuff mark on the leg, the way the light from an unseen window catches the empty, polished seat. It is just a chair, but it is the chair. It is my chair, the one that was always physically present at the table in Wilmot, Georgia, but emotionally vacant, the chair that no one ever spoke to directly, only at or around, the chair that held the girl who was not Grant. The city lights below were a riot of warm yellows, cool blues, and vibrant reds. Millions of people, living, breathing, loving, fighting, all pulsing with life, and in my chest, there was a corresponding space, a cavity that was just as vast, but filled with a cold, dense darkness. The contrast was perfect, the brilliant, external validation of the city, and the dark, internal truth of that phone call. I have learned something in my years away from Wilmot. I have learned that silence is not weakness. My childhood was defined by their brand of silence, the silence of dismissal, of polite indifference, of things left unsaid because they were not important enough to be given voice. But there is another kind of silence. The silence I have built here, in this tower, is different. It is the silence of anticipation, the silence of the artist before the first mark is made, the silence of a room holding its breath, waiting for the curtain to rise. It is the silence of control. This, I thought, as the last bit of purple faded from the sky, this is the beginning of power. The power to own the narrative, the power to decide who gets a seat at the table. It makes me wonder about you. Where are you right now? And what time is it? Are you in a room filled with noise? Or are you in a place of quiet? Are you seen? Or are you the one sitting in the spare seat? I walked over to my desk. It is a simple piece of reclaimed wood, massive and scarred. Standing in stark contrast to the modernity of the building, on it, under a heavy brass paperweight, was a single, remaining invitation. It was identical to the one that was now sitting, unread, on my parents' kitchen counter in Will. No, the one my mother had seen. The cardstock was thick, the color of old cream. The text was embossed, simple, elegant. The Quiet Table, a solo exhibition by Rowan Ellery. And then the details, the date, the time. The envelope was beside it, addressed, in my own hand, to Dr. and Mrs. Ellery. The seal on the back was a deep, crimson red, poured and stamped by me. The sigil was not my initials, but a simple, stylized, empty chair. They saw the wax. They noted its presence, but they never bothered to look at what it was sealing. They never read the invitation. They just heard the date, checked their calendar, and found me wanting. I picked it up, the weight of it, the simple paper and wax, felt heavier than the stone of my phone. I held it for a long time, the silence of the penthouse humming around me, the city lights reflected in the dark glass, watching me, waiting. The red wax of the invitation was still warm from my hand, the embossed edges of the spare chair sharp against my thumb. It was a gesture of formality, the kind Wilmot, Georgia, was built on. Wilmot was not a place. It was a state of being. It was a town of whitewashed brick houses, impeccable lawns cut in perfect, obsessive lines, and a thick, humid air that smelled perpetually of baking pine needles and polite suppression. Our house on Dogwood Lane was the epitome of Wilmot. It was white, naturally, with dark green shutters that were purely decorative. The defining sound of my childhood was not laughter. It was the slow, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the ceiling fans, stirring the heavy air in the living room into something barely breathable. That, and the sound of my mother's piano. My father, Dr. Martin Ellery, was the gravitational center of our universe. He was an internist at the St. Alden Clinic, a place he had built with his own 2 hands. Or so the local legend went. He was a man who believed in the tangible. He believed in blood pressure cuffs, X-rays, balanced ledgers, and the Dow Jones. If you could not measure it, chart it, or assign a dollar value to it, it did not exist. He smelled of antiseptic soap and the faint, leathery scent of his medical bag, a smell that I associated with quiet authority and imminent judgment. My mother, Alice, existed in the spaces he did not occupy. She taught piano in our living room, a space dominated by a grand piano he had bought her as an anniversary gift, a measurable, expensive proof of affection. Her days were a soundtrack of hesitant scales and the frustrated, muffled thud of a child hitting the wrong Chopin. Her voice was like her music, soft, perpetually trailing off, always sounding as if she were apologizing for being in the way, even when she was standing in the center of her own life. And then there was Grant. My brother was the validation. He was the Ellery method made manifest. Grant was the standard, the benchmark against which all things were measured. Our dining room, a room otherwise untouched, was dominated by a tall, glass-fronted cabinet. It was full. It was, in fact, overflowing. Grant's trophies for soccer, Grant's debate plaques, his academic scholarships, his blue ribbons, his medals. It was a shrine to measurable success, and my father would stand in front of it after dinner, a glass of scotch in hand, looking at it the way other men look at a sunset. Grant was the proof that the system worked. I was the variable, the error in the code. I did not bring home trophies. I brought home sketchbooks filled with the faces of strangers in the grocery store. While Grant was calculating his grade point average to the 3rd decimal, I was calculating the exact mixture of blue and gray required to capture the sky before a thunderstorm. I drew on everything. I drew on the edges of my math homework. I drew on the condensation of the car window. I drew on the paper napkins at the dinner table, chronicling the way the light hit the salt shaker. My mother thought it was nice. Grant found it weird. My father saw it as a pathology. I remember, with a clarity that feels like it happened this morning, the day I drew on the kitchen wall. I was 7, maybe 8. I had found a piece of charcoal from the barbecue pit, behind the kitchen door, in that small, forgotten slice of wall. I drew a face. It was a woman, her eyes closed, smiling. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. My father found it that evening. He did not yell. Yelling would have been a waste of energy, a display of the very feeling he sought to eradicate. He simply stood there, looked at the charcoal drawing, and then looked at me, his face impassive. "Stains," he said, his voice calm, clinical. "Stains must be cleaned." He handed me a sponge and a bucket of soapy water. He stood there and watched me scrub the wall until my arm ached and the whitewash was stained a dull, watery gray. The smiling face dissolving into a muddy, meaningless smudge. I was not an artist. I was a stain. This lesson was reinforced at every opportunity. His favorite pronouncement, the one that served as the Ellery family motto, was delivered like a diagnosis. "Rowan, feelings don't pay the bills." He said it when I cried because my dog died. "Grief is an inefficient use of energy." He said it when I expressed frustration with algebra. "Frustration does not solve the equation." And he said it, definitively, when I made the mistake of suggesting I wanted to study art. Art is a hobby. It is not a career. Feelings do not pay the bills. It was a scalpel, that phrase. He used it to methodically cut away the parts of me he deemed non-essential. The sharpest cut, the one that defined the entire trajectory of my life, came at a Sunday dinner. It was a barbecue night. The house smelled of lighter fluid and my dad's slightly burned chicken. We were at the dark oak dining table, the four of us, in our designated seats, Dad at the head, Mom at the foot, Grant on the side by his trophy cabinet, and me, on the side facing the empty wall. The ceiling fan thwacked above us. The only sounds were the scraping of forks on plates and Grant detailing his strategy for the upcoming SATs. I waited for a lull. My hands were shaking. I had a piece of paper folded in my pocket, a certificate. "I won something today," I said into the silence. No one looked up. "I won the regional art competition." I tried again, my voice a little louder. "The empty chair under light painting. I won first prize." My mother paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh, Rowan, that's nice, dear." She glanced at my father. My father was cutting his chicken with surgical precision. "It comes with a scholarship," I said, the words tumbling out. "A $500 scholarship for a summer program at the college." This, I thought, this he would understand. It was money. It was a scholarship. It was measurable. My father finished chewing. He swallowed. He wiped his mouth with his napkin. He looked at Grant. "Did you finish that algebra review? Grant? You have that test on Monday." "Yes, sir," Grant said. "I'm aiming for a 98. "Good." My father nodded. And that was it. The conversation moved on. My mother asked Grant if he wanted more potatoes. The fan thwacked. The fork scraped. It was not malice. It was not anger. It was something far colder. Far more complete. It was irrelevance. My greatest accomplishment, the first true validation I had ever received, was less important than the potatoes. That was the moment I understood. We were a 4-person family, seated at a 4-person table. But in my father's ledger, only 3 of us were present. My chair was there. I was physically occupying the space, but I was symbolically empty. I was unseen. I was the spare seat. My church was not the white-steepled Presbyterian one my parents attended every Sunday. My sanctuary was the garage. It smelled of gasoline, damp cardboard, and bags of fertilizer. The only light was a single, flickering fluorescent tube on the ceiling that buzzed with a sound like an angry insect. It was hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, but it was mine. This was where I hid my real work. This was where I kept the supplies bought with hoarded lunch money. This was where I painted the things I could not say. I was 15. I was sitting on an upturned paint can, looking at the painting I had just finished. The real one. The one that won the prize. The light in the painting was harsh. The chair was stark. The shadow it cast was long and dark. My father's words echoed in the small, damp space. Feelings don't pay the bills. His words were not just sounds, in my mind. They were tangible. They were carved into the grain of that oak dining table back in the house. I could feel the sharp edges of the letters, the deep grooves they left in the wood. I looked at my painting. I looked at the flickering bulb above me, and I made a promise to myself, not to my father, not to my mother, not to the empty air, a promise to the girl sitting on the paint can. I will paint. I will paint the silence. I will paint the empty chair and the space between people. I will paint until the silence itself is forced to listen. I would paint until the world was so loud with my work that even a man who only believed in charts would be forced to look up and see me. I would paint until feelings paid all the bills. I turned 18 in June. By August, I was gone. I left Wilmont on the 10 p.m. Greyhound bus, the air thick with the smell of diesel and the stale, refrigerated breath of the air conditioner. I had one canvas suitcase, a portfolio flat-packed with cheap cardboard, and $300 in cash, saved mostly from the empty chair scholarship money my father had dismissed. I had told my family I was moving to New Winslow to take an introductory course in finance at a city college. It was the perfect lie, the only one they would believe, the only one that translated into their language of utility. Finance was measurable. Finance, in theory, paid the bills. My father had even driven me to the bus station, a rare gesture that felt more like a transaction. He did not hug me. He did not wish me luck. He handed me a crisp $50 bill. Do not be frivolous, he said. A final diagnosis. The bus door hissed shut, a pneumatic sigh of release. As the bus pulled away, I watched the whitewashed houses and the oppressive, manicured green of Wilmot dissolve into the humid darkness. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel regret. I felt the clenching, metallic click of a gear engaging. I was not running away. I was activating. New Winslow was not a city. It was a machine. It was a massive, grinding, indifferent engine of concrete, steel, and ambition. It ate people like me for fuel. I arrived at the Port Authority at 5 a.m., and the air hit me like a physical blow. It smelled of hot pavement, diesel exhaust, and something anciently sour that clung to the back of my throat. The quiet, humid suppression of Wilmot was gone, replaced by the hydraulic shriek of brakes, the subterranean rumble of subways, and the constant, high-frequency scream of millions of people all needing something at the exact same time. My first apartment was a lie. 2. It was a semi-basement room in a borough I could not yet pronounce, rented from a man who only took cash and never made eye contact. The rent was $200 a month. The single window was a tiny, fogged rectangle at ceiling height, its only view the scuffed shoes and tired ankles of people walking by on the sidewalk. The room smelled of cold, damp stone, old rust from the sweating pipes, and the rain that always seemed to be seeping through the porous brick. The dominant sound was not the thwack-thwack of a ceiling fan, it was the constant, low clank-hiss-groan of the building's ancient boiler, a metal dragon I shared a wall with. I learned the city's rhythm, which was the rhythm of survival. I got a job. Then, when I realized the cost of a subway pass, I got a second one. I worked at a cafe near Harbor Square, a place unironically called the Daily Grind. It was aptly named. My day started at 4:30 a.m. when the sky was still an artificial, bruised orange. I was the one who unlocked the doors, who calibrated the espresso machine, who set out the almond croissants that smelled of sugar and chemicals. The morning rush was a blur of steam wands, beeping cash registers, and credit cards. I became a machine of memory. Large skim latte, 1 Splenda, for Mr. Harris. Black coffee, room for cream, for Ms. Jones. Green tea, bag out, for the woman in the red coat. I was an efficient, silent piece of the city's complex infrastructure. I remembered all of their names, their preferences, their small daily anxieties. Not one of them ever learned my name. I was Honey. Sweetie, or most often, just a pair of hands reaching for their money. My second shift was at a diner, washing dishes, from 6 p.m. until midnight. Hot water, steam, the acrid smell of grease and industrial bleach, the clatter of plates. It was mindless. Mechanical work that left my hands raw and my body exhausted. Those were the lean years, which is a romantic way of saying they were the brittle years, the gray years. I lived on tips, stale pastries I was allowed to take home, and instant ramen noodles boiled in a hot pot I was not supposed to have in my room. I was always cold, always damp, always tired, but I was not a stain, and I was not in Wilmot. I stopped drawing on napkins. They were too flimsy. I could not afford canvases. I went to the art supply store and bought the cheapest pads of newsprint, the kind that yellows in a day. I bought charcoal sticks, the ones that cost less than $1 apiece. When I ran out of paper, I used the flattened cardboard from delivery boxes I pulled from the building's recycling. I learned that art does not require a studio. It only requires an artery, and the will to open it. I sketched in Morrow Park, the city's one concession to nature, a square of determined green strangled by skyscrapers. I sketched on the bench between my shifts, a 30-minute window where I was not an employee. I sketched the faces, the commuter faces, closed and tight as fists, the tourist faces, wide and blank, the faces of the homeless, which were not faces, but maps of the city's indifference. I sketched the gears of the machine, the levers of its pain. I sketched spare seats on park benches, on the subway, in the cafe. The city was full of them. I had been in New Winslow for about a year, maybe 2. The time blurred. The seasons were just changes in temperature, not changes in circumstance. It was a cold Tuesday in November. The sky was the color of wet concrete. I was in Morrow Park, my fingers numb, trying to capture the way a man's shoulders slumped as he read a newspaper. "You are holding the charcoal too tight." The voice was like shattered glass and velvet. It cut right through the city noise. I looked up. She was a bolt of color in the gray landscape. She had to be in her 70s, with a severe architectural haircut of pure silver, but her coat was the most vibrant, impossible shade of cobalt blue. She was looking at my sketchbook, not at me. "I am trying to get the line right," I muttered, defensive, pulling my coat tighter. "No," she said, tapping a gloved finger near my hand. "You are trying to control the line, but your hand is shaking. You are fighting the tremor." I hid my hand, embarrassed. I was freezing, and I had not eaten anything but a stale croissant. "I am just cold," she smiled, a tiny, precise crack in a marble facade. "No, you are not. Not just cold. Look." She pointed at the line I had just drawn. It was jagged, nervous, electric. "That tremor is not weakness, child. It is memory. Let it speak. Do not strangle it." I stared at her. No one had ever looked at my work and seen memory. They saw a nice hobby, or a stain. She watched me for another moment, her gaze analytical. Then she reached into the deep pocket of her impossible blue coat and pulled out a simple, heavy card. It was thick, white, and embossed. It read, "Vera Lark, the Lark Foundation for Art and Memory." "You are drawing the symptom," she said, her voice dropping. "I am interested in the cause. When you are ready to show me the cause, call me." She turned and walked away, a slash of blue against the gray pavement, leaving me with a racing pulse and a piece of expensive cardstock clutched in my numb hand. I waited a week. It was the longest week of my life. I called the number. A crisp voice answered. "The Lark Foundation." I gave my name. I was told to be at an address in the warehouse district at 10 a.m. on Saturday. It was not a gallery. It was an old industrial building on the water, the kind with a rattling freight elevator that smelled of oil and river rot. Her office was a vast open loft, the floors raw, peeling cement. The only furniture was a massive steel desk and 2 hard-backed chairs. The rest of the space was filled with art, canvases leaning against walls, sculptures draped in dust cloths, crates marked with foreign addresses. "Show me," she said. She was standing by the enormous windows, the gray light of the Riven River flooding the room. She did not offer coffee. She did not ask me to sit. I unzipped my portfolio. I did not have canvases. I had scraps. I laid my charcoal drawings, my newsprint sketches, my cardboard paintings on the peeling cement floor. It was a pathetic display, the collected works of a ghost, laid out for inspection. Vera Lark walked among them. She was silent. She bent down, her blue coat brushing the dusty floor, and looked closely at the pieces from the garage. The first empty chair, the series I had started in my basement room. The Wilmot table, showing the 4 seats, 3 of V shapes of people, one of them a void. She spent a long time looking at them. The silence in this room was different from the silence in the penthouse. This was not the silence of indifference. This was an active, analytical silence. It was the silence of a bomb technician. She finally stopped at the spare seat, the original one from the competition. She crouched over it, her silver hair catching the light. "Wilmot, Georgia," she whispered. It was not a question. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "My God," she said, still looking at the painting. "Your pain has rhythm. Rhythm. Not anger, not sadness. Rhythm. A mechanical, repeating pattern. A system." She saw the system. She stood up, brushing dust from her coat. "I have a studio," she said, as if commenting on the weather. "It is in the attic of this building. It is small. The light is good. Mostly, the view is of the Riven River. It is also freezing in the winter, but the pipes do not leak. I cannot afford a studio, I said flatly. No, you cannot, she agreed. But I need an assistant, someone to stretch canvases, clean brushes, catalog archives. The work is boring. It is mechanical. You will hate it, but you will have the studio. You work for me 3 days a week. The studio is yours the other 4. And every night, you can quit the diner. I could not speak. It was a lifeline. She walked to the window, looking out over the gray industrial river. One more thing. Rowan Ellery. She knew my name. Stop trying to fix this, she said, gesturing to the paintings on the floor. Stop trying to paint your way out of it. You are rushing to the end. You are trying to heal the wound. She said the word heal with faint disgust. Do not heal it yet. You do not even know what it is. She turned to look at me, her eyes as blue and sharp as her coat. First, you must learn its shape, learn its edges, measure its depth, understand its architecture. Stop painting the feeling. Start painting the structure of the feeling. I stared at her. Structure, architecture, measure. She was speaking my father's language, but she was telling my story, and in that cold, dusty loft, surrounded by the ghosts of my past laid bare on the concrete, I finally understood. My father was wrong about the bills. But he was right about one thing. It was about measurement. Art was not about making things beautiful. It was not about feelings. It was about truth. It was about taking a ruler to the void, and finally, precisely, learning its shape. The attic studio on the Riven River became my crucible. Vera Lark did not teach me how to paint. She taught me how to see. She taught me about the architecture of the art world. It was a machine, just like the city, but it ran on a different fuel. It ran on proximity, perception, ego, and vast, staggering amounts of money. I learned that a gallery was not a church for art. It was a showroom for assets. I learned that critics were not objective arbiters of taste. They were writers building their own brands, trading in the currency of their approval. Vera taught me the politics of the closed door. They want you to knock, she said, smoke from her thin cigarette curling around her silver hair. They want you to beg. Do not, you build your own door, and you make them knock. My first door was the Dockline Collective, a rotating group of artists who rented a raw, unheated warehouse space for group shows. It was the opposite of the polished, silent galleries uptown. It was loud. It smelled of cheap wine and sawdust, and the art was hung on temporary walls. I was the assistant. I was stretching canvases, cataloging archives for Vera 3 days a week, and then I was in my attic studio, painting with a surgical focus. I was not painting my feelings. I was dissecting them. I was painting the mechanics of indifference. I put 2 pieces into the first Dockline show. I stood in the back, terrified. People glanced, nodded, and moved on. Except one woman. She was an art blogger, but one whose opinion was starting to move the needle. She stood in front of Wilmot Table, Study 1, for 10 minutes. The next day, her review was online. It was 3 sentences long, buried in a larger article about the show. Much of the work at Dockline is noise. Then there is Rowan Ellery. Her work is not raw. It is not afraid. It is surgical. She paints the void in the average American family with a terrifying, steady hand. Surgical. My father would have been proud of the word, if not the subject. Vera read the review. Good, she grunted. A word. You now have a word. Now use it. I used it. I stopped painting the chair in isolation. I began painting the table. The table was the battlefield. The table was the stage. The table was the courtroom where the judgment of irrelevance was passed down. And I honed the signature, the 4-person table, 3 places set, 1 chair pushed back, slightly askew. Its back to the viewer. It was the visual representation of a sentence cut short. It was the grammar of exclusion. I called the series The Quiet Chair. It was no longer just my story. As I showed in more small galleries, more collectives, I realized I was not painting an anecdote. I was painting a geography. The quiet chair became a map. It was a map of the feeling of being the one person at the table no one makes eye contact with. The person who is physically present but conversationally invisible. The one at the table, but not of it. It was the map of being there but not. The machine of the city started to notice. An image of quiet chair, Study 3, Thanksgiving, was posted on a popular art blog. It was just a photo, low resolution, taken on a phone, but it was the right photo at the right time. It showed the table groaning with a hyper-realistic feast, and in the foreground, that one empty turned-away chair. Underneath, someone had quoted me from an interview in a tiny art zine. "I am not painting absence. I am painting the language of silence. Some families do not yell. They simply do not speak to you. It is a much cleaner wound." That line, the language of silence, was the spark. The image went viral, not celebrity viral, but art world viral, which is smaller, more intense, and infinitely more valuable. It was reblogged, it was analyzed, it was posted with thousands of personal comments. This is my family. I am that chair. My parents called it being practical. I called it being erased. The map, it turned out, was a map a lot of people were holding. And that is when the first real gear turned. An email, not from a blog, not from a zine, from a producer at CNN. "Dear Miss Ellery, we are producers for CNN Arts. Tonight, we have been following the extraordinary online response to your Quiet Chair series. The resonance is undeniable. We are developing a feature segment on artists who are giving voice to the unspoken narratives of family life. We are tentatively titling the piece, 'The Seat That Speaks for Millions.' We would like to feature you." The Seat That Speaks for Millions. I showed the email to Vera. She read it, took a long drag from her cigarette, and handed the phone back. "So," she said, exhaling, "they are knocking." I did not respond to the email, not yet. The Westport District show was in 3 months. Vera had secured it. It was my first solo show in a real gallery, the kind with white walls, silent investors, and prices that were not written on a sticker. "You will answer them," she instructed. "The day after your show sells out." "If it sells out," I countered. Vera just looked at me. "Do the work, Rowan. The market will follow the noise." The Westport District show was an explosion in a library. Every major piece from the Quiet Chair series was there. We priced them high. Vera said it was not about money. It was about respect. "They do not respect what they can afford too easily," she'd said. The opening night was a blur. I remember the smell of expensive perfume, the sound of champagne flutes, and the quiet, intense looking. People were not just glancing. They were reading the paintings. I saw 2 women, impeccably dressed, silently crying in front of Quiet Chair, Study 5, Christmas. By 9 p.m., every single piece had a small red dot next to the placard. Sold, all of it. I went into the gallery's back office to sign the initial paperwork. The owner, a man I had only met twice, handed me a glass of champagne. "Congratulations, Rowan," he said, raising his glass. "You are, as of this evening, a 6-figure artist." The number in my bank account, which had for years hovered just above 0, suddenly had a comma. And then another one. The next morning, I emailed the CNN producer. "I am available to talk." I did not buy a house in the suburbs. I did not buy a sports car. I did not buy the approval of Wilmot. I bought a weapon. I bought a fortress. I bought the sky. The Aurora Tower penthouse was listed for $11,800,000. It was an obscene, absurd, impossible piece of real estate. It was perfect. I bought it for the walls. Miles of floor-to-ceiling glass. I bought it for the floors. Dark, polished wood that reflected the light like a black, still lake. I bought it for the silence. Up here, 80 floors above the machine, the city noise was gone. There was only the sound of the wind, and the echo. The space echoed. It held the sound of a footstep, the sound of a breath. It was a cathedral built to hold the void. This was not a home. This was a statement. I left half of it completely empty. The other half became my studio. No more attic, no more river rot, just pure light from 3 directions. I bought one other thing, a vintage Steinway grand piano. The kind my mother taught on, only better. I put it in the center of the main living area, its black lacquer reflecting the city lights. I cannot play well. My mother's lessons were hesitant, always interrupted, but sometimes, when the light is fading, I sit and play the few simple, classical pieces I remember. The sound, hesitant and imperfect, fills the vast, empty space. It is no longer her apology. It is my memory. But the art world is a world of gates. The critics, the galleries, the collectors, they are the gatekeepers. They decide who is in and who is out. I had a choice. I could become one of them. I could pull up the ladder, or I could build my own door. The penthouse had a separate service entrance, a large freight elevator. On Saturdays, it is not used. I contacted a youth center in one of the city's forgotten boroughs, a place filled with kids who were experts in the language of silence, kids who were sitting in their own spare seats. I called it Open Seat Saturdays. It is not a class. It is a workshop. It is free. I pay for the buses to bring them here. I pay for all the supplies, not newsprint, but the best canvases, the best paints. They come up in that freight elevator and walk into this impossible glass box in the sky. I do not teach them how to paint. I just give them the space and the materials. And I tell them the one thing Vera told me that mattered. Your voice is valid. Now find its shape. I am not a gatekeeper. I am a locksmith. So I stand here tonight, the invitation to my own show in my hand, the red wax seal feeling like a fresh wound. The penthouse is ready. The paintings are hung. The quiet is absolute. CNN is coming. The critics are coming. The collectors are coming. But they do not matter, because every time I pick up a brush, every time I mix a color, I am not in this $11 million tower. I am back in the garage. I am 15 years old. The air smells of gasoline and fertilizer, and the single fluorescent bulb is flickering, casting a nervous, buzzing light. And I am in a dialogue with that girl. Are they listening yet? I ask her. And she looks at the new canvas, at the dark, polished floors, at the city of lights at our feet. Louder, she whispers. It needs to be louder. The success of the Westport show was the key. It was the gear that engaged all the other mechanisms. It bought me the penthouse. It bought me the silence. And it bought me the one thing the art world respects more than talent: leverage. The Kenset Gallery, which had once been a mid-level player, was expanding. They were launching a massive new flagship space, a brutalist cube of polished concrete and glass, built on the waterfront in the newly gentrified heart of the dock line. It was a statement, and they wanted me to be their first statement. The invitation was not just to show, it was to own the space. The show was titled The Quiet Table, a solo by Rowan Ellery. It was not just an exhibition, it was a summation, my first true major solo show. I designed the invitations myself. I am, at my core, a mechanic of details. I sourced the paper, a heavy cream-colored stock, so thick it felt like suede. I set the type myself, a stark, elegant serif. I commissioned a custom embossing die, the spare chair, pressed into the paper so it left a physical void, a shape you could feel with your thumb. And the seal, I spent an entire Saturday in my studio, the scent of melting wax filling the air. I melted sticks of crimson wax, the color of a fresh wound, the color of an exit sign. I poured each one and stamped it with the chair. I was methodical. I compiled the list: critics, collectors, the producer from CNN, Vera, and the kids from the Open Seat Saturdays program, each one getting a personal invitation. I saved one envelope for last. I wrote the address in my clearest, most controlled script: Doctors and Mrs. M. Ellery, Dogwood Lane, Wilmont, Georgia. It was not a plea. It was not a request for approval. It was a summons. It was a presentation of data. I am a measurable fact. Here's the proof. I dropped it in the mail slot. The small, definitive thud as it hit the bottom of the public mailbox echoed in the empty street. I had done my part. The experiment was in motion. It took 2 days. I was in the studio, working on the final piece, the one that had been resisting me, the one that lived under the constant hum of the spotlights. My phone, set on the concrete floor, vibrated. The screen lit up. "Dad?" The machine inside me clicked into place. I wiped the charcoal from my hands, took a neutral breath, and answered. "Hi, Dad." Rowan, that voice, the same, unchanged, the clinical distance. "Your mother received your invitation." A pause. I heard him clear his throat. "The one with the wax?" I could hear the faint, suppressed judgment in that single word. Frivolous. "Yes. The opening is in 3 weeks. It is the same weekend as Grant's graduation from his residency program." It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the finality of a diagnosis. He had worked very hard. Grant, this was his moment. I stood in my $11.8 million studio, looking at a wall of glass that held the entire city captive, and I was, in that instant, 8 years old, holding a bucket of soapy water. "So you will not be attending," I said. It was not a question. It was the conclusion of his data. "We will be in Boston for the ceremony," he confirmed. "We cannot be in 2 places at once." He said it, the line I had written into my own history. "You understand." It was not a request for empathy. It was a command. It was the dismissal. It was the final, clean cut of the scalpel. "You are the variable that must be sacrificed for the equation to balance. You understand." The line fumbled, the sound of the phone being passed. "Rowan, dear?" My mother's voice, a thin, papery sound, forever rustling with anxiety. "It is just such awful timing, is it not? You know how important this is for Grant. Do not make a fuss. Do not make a fuss." The family motto, the whitewash for the stain. "I am not making a fuss. Mom." "Good. We would not want you to be disappointed." "No problem," I said. The words tasted like iron. "I understand completely." I ended the call. The silence of the penthouse rushed in. It was absolute. The hum of the ventilation, the whisper of the wind 80 floors below, and the frantic, hot beating of my own heart. I walked to the window, the wall of glass. The city was laid out before me, a glittering, indifferent ocean of light, proof of success, proof of power. I pressed my forehead against the glass. It was cold, deeply, shockingly cold. You understand. The phrase was a switch. It turned off the penthouse lights and turned on the single, flickering fluorescent bulb in the garage. It turned off the CNN accolades and turned on the sound of forks on plates. It erased the 6-figure bank account and left only the girl, the variable, the stain, the city lights. Those millions of tiny, sharp pinpricks of validation began to blur. They smeared. The reds and yellows and blues ran together into wet, abstract streaks. I was not crying. My body was simply leaking, a structural failure. I am Rowan Ellery. I am surgical. I am the voice of a generation. I do not need their applause. I do not need their permission. I do not need them to be there. But the lie was as clear as the glass in front of me. I wanted it. I wanted it with a ferocity that shamed me. I wanted the one thing the art world could not give me. I wanted the one thing my father would never, ever provide, the validation of his presence. I wanted him to see the charts, the numbers, the scale of this, and admit I was a measurable success. The woman who built an empire from the sky, and the child standing at a locked door holding a drawing. They were both me, and they were at war. My hand fumbled in the pocket of my painting coat. I touched the worn corner of Vera's first business card. I pulled out my phone and found the picture I had taken of a postcard she sent me once. Rowan. Light does not need an audience to shine. It simply demands space. I took a breath, held it, and let it out. The glass fogged in front of my face, obscuring the city. Demand space. I wiped the moisture from the glass, and from my face, with the same rough motion. I turned back to the room. My gaze fell on the dining area. It was one of the few places in the penthouse I had furnished like a home. A massive table of reclaimed wood. It was surrounded by 8 elegant, high-backed chairs. The paradox was so perfect, so brutal, it was almost funny. I had finally built my own table. A bigger, more expensive table than the one in Wilmont, and it had never seated more than one person. Me. I ate my meals there, alone, looking out over the city. I had built the monument, and I was still the spare seat. The tears stopped. The familiar click of the mechanism engaging returned. The tremor in my hand stilled. This was not a wound. This was data. This was the structure. I walked to my workbench. I picked up a stick of willow charcoal. I grabbed my sketchbook. I went back to the window. I looked at my own faint, ghostly reflection against the sea of lights. The woman, the silhouette, the observer. I began to sketch. I drew the line of the shoulders. Pressed against the glass. I drew the hands, not clenched, not in fists. I drew them open, resting, calm at her sides. She was not a victim. She was a witness. Underneath, I wrote the caption, building peace from the noise I was never invited to. The work. The work was the answer. The work was the door. I put the sketchbook down. The energy was back. It was cold, clean, and pure. I walked across the vast, dark studio. I went to the main control panel. I hit the master switch. Click. Every light in the penthouse went out. The city lights below, the moonlight, everything vanished as the automated blackout shades, which I used for projection work, whispered shut, sealing the room in a perfect, artificial darkness. The silence was absolute. Then, I hit one, single switch. A high-powered, perfectly focused spotlight snapped on. It illuminated the far wall, the wall I had kept from the gallery, the wall I had forbidden the CNN crew from filming, the centerpiece, the final truth. It was massive, 10 feet tall, dominating the space, and it was hidden. It was concealed, from floor to ceiling, by a heavy, theatrical curtain of deep red velvet, the same color as the wax seals. The penthouse was no longer a home. It was not a cage. It was a stage. The silence was no longer the sound of Wilmot's indifference. It was a vow. It was the held breath before the performance begins. "You understand," I whispered into the void, a direct address to the man on the phone, to the ghost in the machine. "No, Dad, you do not." I turned from the velvet-draped secret, the single spotlight casting my shadow long and sharp across the floor. "But you are about to." The night of the opening was a machine of perfect, controlled chaos. The Kensett Gallery's new building was a fortress of concrete and glass, rising from the cobblestone streets of the old dock line. A fine, misty rain was falling, the kind that did not wash the city, but merely glossed it, making the pavement shimmer like dark water. The effect was cinematic. The sidewalk was a frenetic constellation of light, a battle between the steady, warm glow spilling from the gallery's massive windows and the sharp, epileptic pops of paparazzi flashes. They were not there for me, not really. They were there for the money, the collectors, the minor celebrities who came to art openings like this, drawn to the scent of a new, bankable asset. Inside, the gallery was a different world, where the city was cold and wet. The Kensett was warm. The vast, cavernous space, which could have felt like a tomb, was bathed in an expertly engineered light that felt like amber. It was the color of old scotch and honey. The air was alive, a low, rhythmic pulse of upright bass from a jazz trio tucked in a far corner. The scent, subtle but pervasive, of orchids and expensive perfume. And the sound, the murmur, the specific, high-energy hum of hundreds of people who mattered in this world, all in one place, all speaking in hushed, analytical tones. My name, Rowan Ellery, was a new kind of currency. It was on the 40-foot banner hanging from the atrium ceiling. It was on the cover of the thick, heavy catalogs stacked on a minimalist steel table. It was the backdrop. A step and repeat of black and white text. Rowan Ellery, the quiet table, where guests were pausing to have their photos taken. Champagne flutes in hand. I was a brand. I was a surgical, bankable word. I watched them from a slight remove, standing near the back wall. I saw the ecosystem Vera had described. The critics, moving in small, self-important packs, their faces set in a mask of professional skepticism. The collectors, older, impeccably dressed, their eyes not just looking but appraising, their gaze lingering on the red dots that were already, discreetly, appearing next to the preliminary studies I had hung in the entryway, and the press, the art bloggers, the print journalists with their notepads, and, in the center, the CNN Arts Tonight crew. They were not a small unit. They had 2 cameras, a sound engineer, and a bright, focused anchor who was already speaking to the curator. They were not just documenting the event. They were part of it, a mechanism of amplification. I was wearing a simple, severe black dress. My hair was pulled back. I was not the artist as bohemian. I was the artist as surgeon. I spoke to no one. I just waited. I watched the clock. At exactly 8:30, the jazz trio faded out. The house lights, already low, dimmed another 10%. A hush did not fall. It was applied. Julian Crest, the gallery's chief curator, a man with a voice as smooth and polished as the concrete floor, stepped onto a small, raised platform. "Good evening," he said, his voice amplified just enough to fill the space without shouting. "Welcome. We are here tonight not just to open a gallery, but to witness a voice. The art world is full of noise, full of artists shouting to be heard." He paused, letting the silence of the room press in. "And then there is Rowan Ellery. Rowan does not shout. She observes, she measures, she presents. She has taken the most common of domestic settings, the family table, and turned it into a scalpel, dissecting the very structure of our polite, civilized silences." I saw the CNN camera push in, focusing tightly on his face. "It is a profound honor," Julian concluded, "to present the work of an artist who is not just painting, but challenging the very nature of hereditary silence. Ladies and gentlemen, the quiet table." He gestured, not to me, but to the far wall, the wall I had kept from the penthouse, the wall that was, until this second, hidden by the same red velvet curtain. There was a low electric whir. The curtain, all 40 feet of it, began to slide open. The room held its breath. It was not a gasp. It was a cessation. The murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, it all just stopped. The painting was revealed. The quiet table. It was all there. The dark, cavernous space of the Wilmot dining room, rendered not as a room, but as a void. The long, dark, ash-gold table, stretching into an oppressive, vanishing perspective. The light was harsh, from an unseen, fluorescent source, and the figures, on the far side, blurred, their edges indistinct, as if seen through heavy, wet glass, were the 3 presences. My father, a heavy, judgmental shoulder. My mother, a smaller, shrinking shape, her head bowed. My brother, Grant, a sharp, clean profile, already looking away, toward a future that did not include me. They were not portraits. They were smudges. They were the idea of a family, rendered in muted, cold tones, and then, in the foreground, in the precise, brutal, surgical focus that had become my signature, was the 4th chair, my chair. It was not a smudge. Every detail was there. The scuff mark on the leg from my own 8-year-old foot, the grain of the wood, the way the harsh, unforgiving light hit the empty, polished seat. It was pulled out, just slightly, and it was turned. Its back was to the table, Its back was to the family. Its back was to the viewer. It was a definitive, final, silent statement of exclusion. The room was silent. The CNN camera, which had been panning, stopped. The cameraman just held the shot. He held it, and held it, and held it, on the chair, in the absolute quiet. I walked from the back of the room and stepped onto the platform next to Julian. I did not look at him. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the sea of faces, all of them staring, rapt, at my work. I took the microphone. My hand was not shaking. The tremor was gone. I spoke into the silence. My voice was calm, measured, not a shout. "Art is not revenge," I said, the words echoing in the vast, warm room. "It is not about settling scores." I paused. I let them absorb the first part. "It is about remembering yourself, clearly, when no one else does." I stopped. That was it. I had nothing else to say. I placed the microphone back on the stand. For 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds, the silence held. It was the most profound, complete silence I had ever heard. It was not the silence of Wilmot. It was the silence of comprehension. Then, I saw it. A woman in the front row. A famous collector. Her face a mask of perfect composure. Had a single, perfect tear tracing a line down her cheek. Then another. The applause did not start. It broke. It was not a polite ripple. It was a wave. A delayed, sudden, thunderous crash of sound that hit me in the chest. It was not just approval. It was catharsis. It was recognition. It was the sound of 100 other spare seats in that room. Finally being seen. The flashes erupted. The CNN anchor was speaking rapidly into her microphone. But I was not looking at her. My eyes were scanning the crowd. And I found her, Vera. She was standing halfway back, by a concrete pillar. Her silver hair a beacon. Her blue coat a slash of impossible color. She was not clapping. She was not smiling. She was just watching me. As the sound washed over us, as the flashbulbs turned the room into a flickering star, our eyes met. She held my gaze, and she gave me the one, single, tiny nod of her head. That was it. The approval, the click of the machine. Job done. The teaser aired that same night, at 11 p.m. The CNN crew had cut it in the truck, a piece of rapid, brilliant, journalistic aggression. It opened with a shot of the rain-slicked street, then the gallery, then the blurred, anxious faces of the crowd, then the slow, dramatic pull of the velvet curtain. The camera zoomed, fast and hard, onto the painting, onto the chair. The anchor's voice, clean and sharp, cut through. "It is the painting that silenced the New York art world, a single, empty chair that has come to represent a generation." A shot of me, on the platform, my voice clear. "Art is not revenge." Then a cut to a close-up of the woman in the front row, her perfect tear. "From a forgotten garage in Georgia, to the top of the art world." The anchor concluded. "Tonight, we ask, how did one artist turn a spare seat into a movement?" The screen went black. The first call from Wilmot would come in the morning. The machine was now, finally, fully engaged. The night of the show, I did not sleep. I stood at the glass wall of the penthouse, which was now, officially, no longer mine. The adrenaline of the opening, of Vera's nod, of the breaking wave of applause, had receded, leaving behind the cold, clean silence of the high altitude. The city glittered below, an intricate, silent map of connections I had, until now, only observed, at 5 a. The sky began to bleed from black to a deep, surgical gray. At 5:01 a.m., my publicist, a woman Vera had insisted I hire, a woman who specialized in strategic narrative control, hit send. It was not a press release about an art show. It was a legal and financial disclosure. At 6 a.m., the machine, which had been idling, engaged with the force of a tectonic plate shift. My phone did not ring. It began to vibrate on the concrete floor, A low, angry, persistent hum. It sounded like a hornet's nest that had been kicked. It did not stop vibrating. It moved, buzzing, in a slow circle on the floor, a physical manifestation of the storm that was breaking. The first alerts were the art blogs, the ones I expected. Rowan Ellery's Quiet Table is a brutal, beautiful masterpiece. The Ken set opens with a silent roar. That was the echo from last night. That was the art world. I was prepared for that. Then, at 6:30, the real story hit, the one I had planted. It was not in an art journal. It was the front-page story on the digital edition of the New Winslow Chronicle, the city's largest paper. The headline was not about painting. From penthouse to pipeline, artist Rowan Ellery donates $11.8 million home to Youth Art Foundation. The article was stark, dry, and factual, exactly as I had dictated. It detailed the irrevocable legal transfer of the Aurora Tower penthouse, effective this morning, to a newly formed foundation, the Open Seat Project. Its mission: to provide a permanent, high-end studio and gallery space for the Open Seat Saturdays program, serving the city's marginalized and unseen youth. It was not an epilogue. It was the second, louder, more profound explosion. The painting was the diagnosis. This was the surgery. This was the redistribution of assets. At 7 a.m., as if on cue, the full CNN Arts Tonight segment aired. I watched it, standing in the cold morning light, on the 80-inch screen that now belonged to a group of teenagers from the outer boroughs. The segment was perfect. They had intercut the stunning, glossy shots of the gallery with the raw, grainy footage I had given them from the garage in Wilmont. They showed the flicker of the fluorescent bulb, the damp concrete walls, the 15-year-old's painting, and then they showed me, standing on the platform. The anchor's voiceover faded, and my own voice, calm and measured, filled the room. It was never about an empty table. The table in Wilmont was always full. It is about a table with every seat occupied, but lacking a single person who is truly seen. That was the line. That was the switch. My laptop, open on the steel desk, began to flash. The vibration of my phone on the floor became a frantic, seizing dance. The machine was now feeding on itself. It was a deluge. It was a data stream so violent it was almost physical. My inbox, which I had cleared before the show, displayed a number that was climbing too fast to read. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. The Open Seat Project website, which had, until 7 been a simple landing page, received so many simultaneous donation hits that the server crashed. When my web admin got it back online, it crashed again. The messages were not from collectors. They were from people. Subject: I am that chair. Subject: my father said those exact words. DM: my brother was the Grant. I was the Rowan. I have never felt so seen in my entire life. Thank you. Email: I am a 50-year-old man. I am a CEO. I sat in my car and wept listening to the CNN segment. My entire childhood was that painting. Email: I am a family therapist. I am clearing my schedule. I want to volunteer. I have 200 other therapists in my network who will do the same. DM: here is $10. It is all I have. Please buy a canvas for a kid who needs it. Please, fill the seat. Email: I am a partner at a law firm. I am offering my firm's services, pro bono, for the Open Seat Project, forever. It was a flood of pain, a global, collective, simultaneous unburdening. The map I had drawn of my own small, whitewashed prison in Wilmont was, it turned out, a universal blueprint. In the middle of the digital storm, 2 messages, back to back, defined the moment. The first was a text, from Vera. It was one sentence. Now they can't pretend they don't see you. The second wave of messages was different. It was the ghosts of Wilmont, all rising at once. A Facebook message from my old high school art teacher. Rowan, darling, I just saw you on CNN. I am simply bursting with pride. I always knew you had that special spark. Even from that very first day, I always told people, that girl is a true artist. I stared at the message. This was the same woman who had, upon seeing the empty chair for the regional competition, suggested I add more flowers to make it less sad. A text from an unknown number. Hey Rowan, it's Sarah Jessup, from Dogwood Lane? My mom just called me. She saw you on the news. We are so proud of you. Wilmot is cheering for you. We always knew you were destined for big things. I remembered Sarah Jessup. She had once accidentally spilled a Coke on one of my sketchbooks. I read every single message from Wilmot. I read the sudden, retroactive belief, the desperate, fawning need to attach themselves to the success they had never facilitated. I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, clinical validation. I read them, and I did not reply. I archived them. They were data. Then, the machine of professional media kicked in. The calls were no longer to my publicist. They were finding my personal number. Ms. Ellery, this is a producer for Good Morning America. We would love to have you in studio tomorrow morning. Ms. Ellery, the Today Show would like to fly you to New York. All expenses paid. Ms. Ellery, we want to feature you on the cover of New Winslow magazine, The Woman Who Gave Away the Sky. I let them all go to voicemail. I was not their crying girl makes good story. I was not their rags to riches spectacle. They wanted the feelings. They wanted the trauma. Packaged for a morning audience, I had given them the structure. I had given them the action. I maintained the strategic silence Vera had taught me. The work speaks. The action speaks. My silence, in the face of this media hurricane, only made them louder. It made the story bigger. The quiet table was no longer a painting. It was an icon. It was being shared in the millions. It was a meme, in the truest sense of the word. And then, the hashtag started. Fill the seat. It was not about my painting anymore. It was about their tables. People were posting pictures of their own family dinners, of the one chair that was always left out, of their own art, their own stories. The painting had become a movement. I stood up from the desk. The penthouse was silent, save for the incessant, manic buzzing of the phone. I walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, a cold, white, winter light. I looked down at the city. It was no longer a glittering, distant map of stars. It was just a city. For my entire life, I had been the girl in the basement, in the attic, in the park, looking up at the lights, wondering how to be seen. Today, I was the woman in the tower, and the entire city, the entire world, was looking up at me. The national, public, amplified validation was complete. The case was closed. The exhibit was open. The family conflict, which had once been a quiet, internal, localized ache, was now, thanks to CNN, a matter of national public record. The fuse I had lit in that gallery was now screaming toward Georgia. The phone, which had been buzzing with unknown numbers, suddenly stopped. The vibration ceased. For a moment, the silence was perfect. Then, it rang. A single, clear, incoming call. Not a text, not an email. A call. I looked at the screen. Mom. I stood in the center of the penthouse. The silence of the high altitude a stark contrast to the storm raging on my devices. The phone, which had been buzzing with the frantic energy of the anonymous public, now lay still. Then, it rang. A single, clear, targeted summons. The screen glowed. Mom! I let it ring 3 times. A small, petty, human delay, a space to let the girl in the garage catch up to the woman in the tower. I pressed the screen. Hello, Mom? Rowan? Her voice was not the one I knew. The usual, apologetic lightness was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tremor. Rowan? Dear? I am here. We saw the news, on the television. A pause. I heard a shaky, shallow breath. That place, that apartment, the penthouse. She said the word as if it were foreign, as if it might bite her. Rowan, was that really yours? The question was not about ownership. It was about comprehension. It was the sound of her entire, carefully constructed reality. The whitewashed house in Wilmont, the benchmark sun, the hobbyist daughter, cracking from floor to ceiling. I looked out the window. The morning sun was hitting the glass of a neighboring skyscraper, refracting a blade of light onto the polished floor. Yes, Mom, it was, oh, a small, compressed sound, like a bird hitting a window. Oh my, it looked so high. They said, on the news, they said $11,800,000. She pronounced the number as if it were an incantation, a magic spell she could not believe. I said nothing. I let the number, the measurable fact, sit in the air between New Winslow and Wilmont. It's just wonderful, dear, she said, the tremor increasing, her voice trying to find its old script. We're so surprised. It's just, why, Rowan? Why did not we know? There it was, the question. Why were we not included in the data? I closed my eyes. I pictured the kitchen table, the salt shaker. The way the light hit it, I pictured her, glancing at my father for permission to speak. Because you never asked. The silence on the line was no longer hers. It was mine. I had just handed it to her. Oh, she said, her voice now impossibly small. Well, I see. Your father, he wants to. She fumbled. She broke. She did what she always did. She passed the phone to the authority. The line did not click. I just heard the muffled sound of the receiver being handed over, a clumsy domestic tragedy. But before he could speak, my phone buzzed in my hand, a notification. Sliding down from the top of the screen, a text message. Grant. The text was blunt. Rowan. Saw the CNN thing. That painting? That penthouse? Jesus, why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at the text. I looked at the dad still waiting on the other end of the silent, open line. The two men of the house, the core and the benchmark, suddenly demanding data they had never requested. I held the phone to my ear, listening to my father's silent breathing. As I typed a reply to my brother with one thumb, my reply was 3 words. I did. You did not look. I hit send. I heard the swoosh of the message launching into the ether. Rowan? My father's voice finally said. I brought my full attention to the call. Hello, Dad? Rowan. His voice, not shaky, not surprised. It was the voice I knew, the clinical diagnostic tone of Dr. Martin Ellery, the voice of a man assessing a new, complex, and deeply irritating symptom. You have caused, he said, and I could hear him choosing his words with immense, controlled precision. Quite a stir. He framed it as an illness, a disruption, a fever. The gallery show, the television, and now this. This donation. He said the word donation as if it were a waste product. That is a significant financial transaction. $11.8 million. That is not a hobby. No, I said. It is not. You should have told us, he said. It was not an expression of hurt feelings. It was a statement of failed protocol. Why? I asked. The question was a scalpel. Why? He huffed, a small, impatient sound. Because this level of finance, this kind of public exposure, you are in over your head. I could have helped. I could have advised you on the tax implications. I could have set up a proper board. You should not have done this alone. I stared at the blade of light on the floor. It was so bright it hurt to look at, advised me, helped me, controlled the asset. He was not looking at the art. He was not looking at the why. He was not seeing the filled seats at the open seat Saturdays. He was seeing a massive, measurable asset that his variable, his outlier, had just given away without consulting him, the chief physician of the family's finances. I let the silence build. I let it stretch. Taut as a piano wire. This was my silence now, not his. This was the silence of the penthouse, the silence of power. Helped, I said, my voice as flat and polished as the floor. Dad, when I was 18, I emailed you my application for the City College finance course, the one I lied about, and I attached, in that same email, my digital portfolio for the new Winslow Art Institute. You replied, "Good to see you are finally being practical about finance. We will discuss tuition for that." You never mentioned the art. Rowan, that is not. When I was 20, I cut him off, my voice remaining perfectly level. I was washing dishes in a diner. I was living in a basement that smelled like rust. I called, and I asked for a $200 loan to buy canvases for a student show. You told me, and these were your words. "Feelings do not pay the bills. Rowan, do not be foolish." And then you gave the phone to Mom, who told me not to make a fuss. I was teaching you responsibility. Every email, I continued, the surgical dissection in progress. Every letter, every small, tentative announcement of a minor success was met with silence. Or worse, it was met with a question about Grant's residency. I tried to show you, I tried to give you the data, but the data was in a language you refused to learn. I stopped. I had presented my case. The line was dead air. But this silence was different from all the silences of my childhood. The old silence, the Wilmot silence, was heavy. It was oppressive. It was the sound of judgment, of dismissal. This silence was hollow. It was weak. It was the sound of a man who had run out of charts, a man who had been presented with a symptom he could not diagnose, and a set of numbers that did not add up. It was, I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity, the sound of regret, not regret for the emotion, but regret for the miscalculation. He had bet on the wrong horse, and it had just won the Triple Crown and then given the prize money away. He finally spoke. His voice was cracked, the clinical shield was gone, and what was left was just a 60-year-old man, confused and wrong. "It is a shame," he said, his voice thick. "It is just a shame you did not think to let your parents participate. Participate." The word hung in the air of the penthouse. Participate. In the money? In the fame? In the CNN interviews? In the photo ops? He still saw this as a performance, a show he had missed the invitation to. He still, after all of this, did not understand. He did not understand that he had been the main character all along. I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass, the woman with the tired eyes, the city at her back. "But you were participating, Dad," I said, my voice suddenly gentle. "What?" he asked, lost. "You were always in the paintings. You were always in the work. From the very first one." I took a final, steadying breath. The cold, the distance, the clinical observation, the measurement, the silence. I paused. I delivered the final line. "That was your part, and you played it perfectly." The silence that followed was total. It was the sound of a circuit breaking, the sound of a connection severed, not by anger, but by truth. There was no response. There was nothing left to say. The diagnosis was complete. It was terminal, and it was correct. I am my father's daughter. I am surgical. I moved my thumb to the red icon on the screen. The click of the call ending was the cleanest, most final sound in the world. The phone dropped from my hand onto a suede chair. It was over. I did not go to the studio. I did not paint. There was no energy for it. The adrenaline, the anger, the sharp, cold need to prove, it had all drained away, leaving a vast, quiet, finished emptiness. The sun was beginning to set. The penthouse, which had been so full of noise and light all day, grew dark. I did not turn on the lights. I stood at the window, just as I had the night before. But I was not the same woman. The city was still there. It was turning on. One by one, then 1,000 by 1,000, the lights in the buildings across the river began to glow. Millions of windows, millions of small, warm, isolated squares of light. They were not stars. They were not a map of success. They were... I realized millions of I wish, millions of if only, millions of conversations that never happened, millions of unspoken words. The whole city was a collection of quiet tables. My story was just one, but I had said it, I had painted it, and I had signed my name. After the call, I lived in the strange, hollow silence of a finished war. The media storm raged, but it was outside the walls. The Open Seat Project was now a machine run by a board of people far smarter than me, fueled by an avalanche of donations. My publicist was a firewall. The penthouse, legally, was no longer my home. It was the foundation's central asset. I was just its most famous, temporary resident, presiding over the transfer. I spent 3 days. I did not paint. I just was. I watched the light move across the polished floors. I watched the city breathe. I listened to the high, thin sound of the wind. On the 4th day, I picked up my phone. I opened a new text message. I typed in 3 numbers. Mom, Dad, Grant. The message was 5 words. Saturday, 7:00 p.m., my place. I did not sign it. I offered no explanation, no context, no, I would like to talk. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. I hit send. My mother replied in 10 seconds. We will be there, Grant replied in a minute. Okay. My father did not reply at all, but I knew he would be there. Saturday. I did not prepare for a performance. I did not hire caterers. I did not fill the penthouse with the orchids and lilies of the Kensett Gallery. I went to the market. I bought a chicken. I bought potatoes and rosemary and a good, crusty loaf of bread. I bought 2 bottles of simple, honest red wine. At 5 p.m., I put the chicken in the oven. The scent that filled the vast $11 million space was not ambition or art or money. It was just roast chicken. It was the smell of an ordinary Sunday, a smell that had been absent from my entire adult life. I set the dining table, my table, the long, reclaimed wood table with the 8 empty chairs. I set 4 places. I used simple, heavy white plates. I did not light 100 candles. I lit 10. I placed them on the table, and their small, warm, flickering light pushed back against the cold, infinite blue of the twilight pressing in through the glass walls. The amber light softened the concrete, warmed the steel, and made the space feel less like a gallery and more like a church. I looked at the far wall. The stage, the velvet curtain, was gone. In its place, hanging in the center of the living area, in the seat of judgment, was the painting, the quiet table. It was the only piece of art in the room. It was the witness. At 7 p.m., precisely, a soft ding echoed through the penthouse. The private elevator, the one that opened directly into the living room, had arrived. The stainless steel doors slid open with a whisper. They stood there, framed in the elevator, like a portrait of awkward, displaced ghosts. My mother, Alice, looked smaller than I had ever seen her. A beige coat clutched in her hands, her eyes wide, darting from the floor to the ceiling, trying to comprehend the scale. My father, Martin, was the opposite. He stood unnaturally straight, his shoulders squared in his best suit, a man trying to assert his presence in a space that dwarfed him. His posture was a defense mechanism, and Grant, my brother, the benchmark, looked lost. He was holding a bottle of wine, a generic Pinot Noir, a social offering that was suddenly, absurdly, inadequate. My mother spoke first. "Rowan," she breathed. Her eyes were not on me, but on the view behind me, the sea of lights. "Oh, Rowan, it is beautiful." "Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad. Grant." I walked toward them. I did not hug them. The space between us was too heavy. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm. "Please, come in." I did not wait for them to enter. I turned to the table. I did not want them to feel like guests. I did not want to be the host. I wanted this to be a neutral territory I happened to command. They stepped out of the elevator. I heard their footsteps on the floor. My mother's, hesitant. My father's, too loud, too definitive. "Thanks for having us," Grant mumbled, holding out the wine. "Thank you," I said, taking it. "Please, sit down." I gestured to the table, and then I did the one thing that changed the entire dynamic of the night, the one thing that reversed the orbit of our family. I walked to the chairs. I pulled one out for my mother. "Mom, sit here." I pulled one out for my father. "Dad," I pulled one out for Grant. "Grant?" I seated them, at my table, in my space. They sat, a stunned, silent, obedient row, their backs to the glittering, endless city, their faces turned toward me and toward the painting, which hung directly in their line of sight. I sat at the head of the table, the fourth seat, the one that had never been empty. The silence was profound. It was the silence of a courtroom. Grant, bless his pragmatic, benchmark heart, tried to fill it. The flight was good, a little turbulence over Pennsylvania, but not bad. "Oh, was it?" My mother jumped in, her voice too bright. "Ours was fine. Just so much traffic from the airport." "The infrastructure here," my father said, his voice a low rumble. "It is not designed for this density. The weather, the flight, the traffic, the holy trinity of uncomfortable small talk, the temporary, flimsy bridges thrown across a chasm. I let them talk. I let them exhaust the safe topics. I poured the wine. I brought the bread to the table. I watched my father look at the painting, then at his plate, then at the painting. He was measuring, he was analyzing, he was trying to find his place in this new, impossible equation. I let the silence settle again. After the traffic, after the weather, I let it sit, heavy as wool. Then, I broke it. I did not look at my father. I looked at the painting. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the small talk. He froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. "Do you know why I painted it?" It was not an accusation. It was a question, a real, quiet, surgical question. He looked at the painting, the blurred, distant, judgmental shoulder that represented him. He put the bread down. He looked at me. His clinical mask was gone. He looked tired. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "Because of us." My mother's breath hitched. "Rowan, we never meant. We just wanted you to be safe," she said. The old, familiar script, the one that whitewashed the wall. We worried. That life, this art, it is not safe. Your father just wanted you to be secure, to pay your bills." I looked at my mother, her eyes pleading, her entire being an apology. "Mom," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Sometimes safe is the thing that hurts the most." Her face crumpled. She did not have a reply to that. "She is right," Grant said, his voice low. We all looked at him. Grant, the perfect, the successful, the standard. He was staring at his own hands, his glass of wine untouched. "You were always different, Rowan," he said. "And we were just following the rules. I was following the rules, Dad's rules." He looked up, and his eyes met mine. There was no envy in them. Not anymore. There was a sort of baffled awe. "What you did, leaving, surviving, building this is," he shook his head. "You are braver than all of us put together." "It is not about bravery," I said. "Is it not?" My father's voice boomed, startling us. He was looking at me, his gaze so intense it was almost a physical thing. "No," I said. "It is about survival." My father stared at me. The silence stretched. The candlelight flickered on his face, a face I had only ever seen as a mask of authority. Now, I saw the cracks. I used to think," he said, and he had to stop to clear his throat. "I used to think that art, that feelings were a weakness, a luxury, a frivolous, non-essential function. He looked at the painting. He looked at the vast, impossible room bought with that frivolous function. I thought I was teaching you to be strong, practical. I thought I was teaching you how to survive. He finally, looked back at me. It turns out, he said, his voice breaking on the last word, that art, this was how you were surviving. He had taken his entire ledger, his entire belief system, his life's work of measurable facts, and in one sentence, he had admitted it was all wrong. I did not cry. I did not hug him. I did not say, "I told you so." I just watched him. The man who had been a god, a tyrant, a force of nature, was just a man who had made a terrible miscalculation and knew it. My mother was crying, silent tears, her hand over her mouth. Grant was staring at his plate. The silence that fell on the table this time was new. It was not the old, heavy, oppressive silence of Wilmot. It was not the cold, angry silence of my phone call. It was a permissive silence. It was the sound of a wound, finally, after 20 years, being opened to the air. It was the sound of a new, fragile, terrifying space opening up, a space where we could, perhaps, begin to build something else. It was the sound of a table being reset. The roast chicken was gone, the wine glasses, empty, the candlelight had burned low, the wax pooling in small, amber circles, but no one moved. We sat, the four of us, in the new, permissive silence that had settled over the table. My father's admission. It turns out, this was how you were surviving. Still hung in the air, a physical, tangible thing. It was an object in the room, as real as the wine bottles, as heavy as the table. After a long time, a time that could have been minutes or an hour, I stood up. My movement broke the spell. "Come," I said. I did not move to clear the plates. I walked away from the table, toward the center of the vast, dark living area. They followed, hesitant, like ghosts unsure of their new boundaries. I led them, the four of us, until we were standing as a group in front of the witness, the quiet table, the painting, in the dim light, the moonlight from the glass walls catching the oil. It looked even harsher. A dark mirror, the blurred, indistinct figures of my family, and the one, sharp, surgically precise chair, turned away in defiance and pain. They stood and looked at it, my mother, her hands clasped, Grant, his eyes on the floor, my father. His gaze fixed on the chair, his chair, the one in the painting that represented his judgment. "That," I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the cavernous space, "is the data. It is the truth of what was. It is the record." My father nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off the canvas. "Yes," he said. I turned away from the painting and walked back to the real dining table, the one where the remnants of our meal sat. "This," I said, gesturing to the plates, the bread, the wine, "is what is," I looked at them, a tribunal of three, standing in the shadow of their own portrait. "We can change this," I said. "This family, this structure, but not with a single apology, not with one dinner." I looked at my father. "This ends, or it continues. If we are to have this," I motioned to the table. "It comes with conditions, terms, a new contract." My voice was not emotional. It was not angry. It was the voice of the Open Seat Project's director, which, I supposed, I now was. "Condition 1, I said, holding up a finger. "No more practical advice. My life, my art, my finances, they are not problems for you to solve. They are not ledgers for you to balance. You are not my physician. You are my father." "Condition 2, I looked at Grant, who met my gaze. "No more comparisons. I am not Grant. Grant is not me. The trophy cabinet is closed. The benchmarks are retired. And condition 3, I looked at all of them. No more silence as a weapon. No more silence as dismissal. No more silence as punishment. If you are angry, you will use your words. If you are confused, you will ask. If you are proud, you will say it. If you cannot, if you break these terms. I walked to the chair my father had sat in. I grasped its high, wooden back, and I pulled it out, turning it slowly, deliberately, until its back was to the table, just like the painting. Then the chair turns out again, I said, my voice dropping. And this time, it does not turn back. Is that clear? My mother let out a small, choked sob and nodded, her hand over her mouth. Grant looked at my father, then at me. I will, he said, his voice hoarse. I will be the reminder, Dad. When you slip, I will be the one to remind you. My father did not look at Grant. He did not look at my mother. He was staring at the chair I had just turned. He seemed, for a moment, to be looking at a ghost. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He did not pull out a handkerchief or a wallet. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded, and folded again, and then again, into a thick, small, worn square. The creases were soft, the ink beginning to fade. He unfolded it. It was the newspaper clipping, the CNN headline. From penthouse to pipeline. He had been carrying it. For weeks, he had read it, and folded it, and put it in his pocket, a secret, shameful penance. I read this, he said, his voice thick. The morning after you called. You said nothing, I whispered. I was ashamed, he said. The word ripped out of him. The man on the television, the man who did not see, that was me. It was a public diagnosis of me. I did not know what to say. He looked up from the clipping. His eyes, his cold, clinical, blue eyes, were, for the first time in my life, exposed. They were not angry. They were not judgmental. They were full. Rowan, he said, my name a rough, unfamiliar sound in his mouth. I am sorry, he said it. I am sorry I measured you with my ruler. He took a shaky breath, the clipping rattling in his hand. It was the only one I had. The words I had spent 30 years of my life waiting for. The words I had built an $11 million empire to extract. And now that they were here, they did not feel like victory. They did not feel like a trophy. They felt quiet. They felt like a key, turning in a lock, in a door I had stopped knocking on years ago. I did not run to him. I did not hug him. The space between us was still a construction site. Instead, I walked to the far wall, where the extra dining chairs were stacked. I picked one up. It was heavy, made of solid oak. I carried it back to the table. I did not place it at the table. I placed it near the head, angled toward the room, a silent, waiting presence. What is that for? My mother asked, wiping her eyes. This, I said, placing my hand on the back of the chair, is the open seat. This is for the next kid who walks out of that elevator for the Saturday program. This is for the kid who thinks they are a stain, who thinks they do not belong in a room like this. This chair is here to say, we see you. We saved you a place. My father looked at the chair. He understood. This was not a family dinner. This was a mission statement. And in that perfect, profound, finished silence, my phone rang. The sound was a violence, a shrill, digital, profane intrusion. We all jumped. I pulled it from my pocket. The screen flashed. Vera Lark. I have to take this, I said. Vera? Hello? Rowan, she said. Her voice was not Vera's. It was my publicist, using Vera's override code. I know. Do not hang up. It is CNN, live, right now. They are running a segment on the Fill the Seat movement. It is exploding. They are asking about you. They want to comment on. And I am quoting. what reconciliation after silence looks like. They are patched through to my line. Right now. No, I said. Absolutely not. Rowan, they are live. The anchor is vamping. The whole world is talking about your painting. And they want to know what happens next. Live, on air, my family, standing here, wrecked, in the candlelight, under the gaze of their own judgment. The whole world, my father's words. It is a shame you did not think to let your parents participate. Participate. I made a decision. It was not an emotional one. It was a surgical one. It was the only move on the board. I looked at my father. He was watching me, his hand still clutching the folded news clipping. I held the phone out to him. Dad, I said, my voice low and urgent. You said you wanted to participate. He stared at the phone. What? This is CNN. They are live on the air. They want to know what reconciliation looks like. They want to know what happens after the painting. I pushed the phone into his hand, the one that had held a scalpel, a pen, a ledger. So if you want to participate, if you really see me, tell them, my mother gasped. Rowan, no, you cannot. But my father was looking at me. He saw the architecture of the moment, the public failure, the private confession, and now, the public test. He took the phone. He held it to his ear. I saw his thumb press the speaker button. Rowan Ellery's silence on this is deafening. The anchor's tinny voice filled the room. We are all asking, what does repair look like? Hello? My father said. His voice, the old, clinical, authoritative rumble. The anchor stopped. Hello? Is this Rowan Ellery? My father looked at me. He looked at the painting. He looked at the chair he had just been forgiven for. He took a breath. No, he said, his voice clear. This is not Rowan Ellery. He paused. He was not a doctor. He was not a judge. He was, finally, just a witness. My name, he said, his voice clear and strong, broadcasting live to millions of people. Is Dr. Martin Ellery. I am the man who did not see his daughter. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Today, my father said, his voice breaking, but his words ringing in the absolute silence. Today, I see her. He lowered the phone. He did not hang up. He just held it, his arm dropping to his side. It was done. The cycle was broken, publicly, irrevocably. I walked to the wall, to the painting, to the quiet table. That, I said, was the truth for 20 years, but it is not the truth of this moment. I pressed a small, hidden button on the wall. There was a low whir. The painting began to slide sideways. My family watched, stunned, as the quiet table, the monument to their failure, the icon of my pain, rolled away on a motorized track, and behind it, another canvas, already stretched, already framed, slid into its place. It was a new painting, the same room, the same dark, ash gold table, but the light was different. It was not the harsh, clinical glare. It was the warm, amber candlelight from our dinner, and the chairs. All 4 chairs were pulled in. They were occupied, not by portraits, but by 4 warm, present, engaged shapes of color, leaning toward each other, under the frame, a small brass plaque. It read, Seat taken. My father's confession, live on CNN, became the story. The clip of the mystery man who had seen his daughter went, predictably, globally viral. The calls and the donations started again, but the messages were different. They were not just, I am that chair. They were, I just called my son. I am flying to see my sister. I am going to pull in the chair. The calls were not about the wound anymore. They were about the repair. I stood at the window of the penthouse, the room that was no longer mine, the room that was now a workshop for kids who needed a seat. I looked out at the city. It was not a distant, glittering goal. It was not a cold, glass box in the sky. It was just a city, full of tables, full of chairs. My living room, I realized, was finally truly open. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I am so glad I got to share it with you. I am wondering, where are you listening from? What time is it? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to connect with you and hear your own thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people who need to know they are seen.